Welcome to part 6 of creating visual movie effects in Blender. In this video we'll be talking about wire removal. Specifically, we'll be getting rid of wires using animated masks. Now in this video we'll actually be talking about several things. It's going to be a multi-part project that we'll be doing in this video. We'll be talking about, of course, animated masks in compositing. We'll be talking about tracking. And we'll be talking about removing tracking markers. Let's go ahead and take a look at my source footage. Now it's important to note that I took the source footage on a tripod using a Canon T3i camera, which allows for manual exposure and focus control. That's important because you want to have two plates. In this case, I have a plate of me pretending to levitate a candle which does not exist. So that's my kind of background plate or footage. And then I have a video of myself lifting up a candle, not with a wire, but with a stick. This is a zero budget project. I just used a stick from a set of devil sticks that I have, and as you can see on the screen right now, I put a nail in the back of the candle and then duct taped this stick onto that nail on the candle. So we're going to be combining these two pieces of footage in which I raise and lower a candle. I'll be removing everything except for the candle and the reflection on the table, and compositing that over top of the footage of me waving my hands around. And we'll also be getting rid of these two little tracking markers, and you'll see what those are for as we get going. Let's go ahead and jump now into Blender, and the first thing I'll do is I'll bring open two separate windows here. So in fact, I'm going to get rid of this tool shelf. I'll press T on my keyboard to hide that. Let's go ahead and grab this little crosshatched area, and I'll drag it to the left to split that window into two. I'll change this left window type into a node editor window. This is where we're actually going to be bringing together the video clips. And on this right hand side, I'm going to change the window type into a movie clip editor. So we have a node editor on this side and now a movie clip editor on this side. I don't like how it always brings up these side panels, so I'll press T and N, and then on this window N to hide the side panel. Let's go ahead and start using some compositing nodes. So I'll switch to compositing nodes right here, and I'll click on use nodes and backdrop, and I'll zoom in. I don't need render layers, so I'll select that and press X to delete it. I'll press Shift A. I'm going to bring in this case, we're not going to be using a movie clip node. We're going to be doing our video editing right inside of the node editor window actually. So we're going to use the image node instead. And the reason why I'm doing this is because you'll notice that unlike in this video, as compared to my split screen tutorial, and in that video I actually had to do some editing ahead of time to make two clips of my foreground and background, or the two different versions of me have clips of the exact same length. In this case, we're going to be doing all that video editing using the image nodes that we'll be using. So I'll take that image node, I'll press Shift D with it selected, and I'll move the copy down there. Shift D, of course, is duplicate. I'm going to composite these two together. Let's go ahead and open the footage up first. So I'll click on Open, and on my desktop I have two pieces of footage. I believe 9669 is the version that has the candle in it with the stick raising it up. And then this second one will have, I'll open that up, and on my desktop 9672. These are just videos straight from my camera. That's the version of me waving my hands around. They're two separate video files because I wasn't happy with the way that I was making it look like I was levitating the candle with my hands waving around in one version. So I actually went back to my camera, which was still set up, and I put the SD card back in my camera and I refilmed myself doing that. But you'll actually see that the footage does not line up properly because the camera got jiggled just a little tiny bit. So I'll show you how to correct that in your own footage as I will in this. Let's go ahead and press Shift A on our keyboard in the node editor window to add a color alpha over. Of course, the alpha over node is how you combine or layer different video files or images together. So I'll just drag this little output port of the image from each of these image nodes to the alpha over, and I'll connect this up. I also want to have a background so I can see what I'm doing. So I'll press Shift A, and under output I'll add a viewer node that you have a backdrop, which I have selected as well to allow a backdrop on the header down here. Let's go ahead and add a Shift A layout reroute node. That's of course just a little dot, but if you put it in a noodle, you can then have a Y in the road. You can left click and drag to make a split. So you don't have to have two noodles coming out of the same alpha over output to do two different output composite and viewer nodes. Great. So we have the footage here. If I press V, I can zoom out or shrink the backdrop. And if I hold Alt, I can pan it around. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like. If I scrub through though, because I'm using image nodes, I cannot see any movie, and that's because it thinks that it has 0 frames in each movie. So I'm just going to type in 30,000 into each one, just because it's not going to have nearly that many. It's going to have way fewer, but then we can actually scrub through and see the footage. Great. So I sit down. Footage is way longer than 250. I start waving my hands at some point. So this is where video editing comes in. Right now, this footage is loading just as it got taken out of my camera, and so I sit down, which I don't actually want to have in my final movie, and I get adjusted, then I start using the force, as it were. And as you can see, right at about frame, let's see, where is it? I put my hands down, and right at about frame 550 is where I start to quote-unquote use the force to raise up that imaginary candle. Now, I don't want to start my footage rate at frame 550. I want to start maybe 100 frames before. So let's say that if Blender loads in the video file and it starts, of course, at frame 0, and we want to start at frame 450 in this case. That's where I want to start the footage, and I start using the force in that video at frame 550. What I want to do is I want to change the offset value to where I want to start the video. In this case, I want to start from the original footage. I want to start the video at frame 450. So I'm going to slide over, and so this node will actually think that the footage starts at the original video is 450, and that'll get put at Blender's frame 1. So I'm going to change this offset value in this node right here. That's of the footage that we can see. The offset will now be frame 450. So it's starting at frame 450 of the original footage, but that 450 is now at frame 0 in Blender. So now, as you can see, if I go back to frame 0 or frame 1, that's 100 frames before I start using the force, and then at frame 100, you can see I start using the force to lift that imaginary candle. Great. Let's go ahead and just quickly switch these two inputs around so I can adjust the offset of myself raising up the candle. So I come in, I pick up the stick, and at frame, is it 450? Yes, it's at frame about frame 104, 450. I start to jiggle the candle around, and so that's where I'm going to actually have that consider where I'm using the force at that point, 450, just to keep it even. So again, just like in the footage of me waving my hands around, I'm going to do 100 frames before that, so I'm going to offset at 350. So right here I'll type in 350, and so now if I scrub through, you can see that about 100 frames in, that's when the candle starts to go up. And then I actually counted how I synced these two things up, how long I knew, or how I knew how long to kind of raise the candle up for as compared to how long I waved my hands around for, was I just counted to 15 in my head. So I took about 3 seconds to raise the candle up, and then I held it for about 9 seconds, and then I lowered it for 3 seconds, so a total of 15 seconds. In fact, if I watch this footage, I can actually see myself counting out to 15. If I switch this footage around now, you can see that I'm just doing it for the same amount of time, and you might have to do this a few times if you're replicating this for yourself to get that timing to line up properly. But in my case, it worked out quite well because I've already practiced this. Okay, so now we have to do a few different things. We have to create a mask, so let's go ahead and do that. I'll go back to frame 0, and I'm going to put the candle below the version of me waving my arms around in the black shirt. So this candle will be on top of the footage of me waving my arms around. But we have to cut around the candle and the table so that only that part of that video shows through, and then the background, the rest of the video will be this footage here. Let's go ahead and load this same footage into the movie clip editor window, and we're going to have to do that same offset in here as well. So I'll go ahead, is it right here? No, I actually have to click on open. I'll go to my desktop. I'm going to open up the 9669, the version of me with just the candle floating, and there it is. Now, before we start tracking, before we start masking, we have to use the same offset that we used over here, in this case 350. And where is that? Well, if I press N to bring up my properties panel, and then I go to footage settings, we wanted to use that same frame offset. If we don't do this right away and we do our tracking of these markers, or do our masking, then we'll have to redo our tracking and masking. So let's go ahead and change that to 350, I believe. And so now if I scrub back to the beginning, hopefully the two pieces of footage line up. Yes, they pretty well do. So the reason why we're going to track in this case is because I don't want to have to animate a mask around this moving candle manually. We're going to let tracking do most of the work for us. The reason why I put 2 dots on my candle is because I want to track rotation as well, or just have a good track. So I put 2 dots just with a felt tip marker. So I'm going to hold Control down. I'm in tracking mode. I'll press Control on my keyboard and left click with my mouse, and I'll put a tracking marker down that way. I'll press S to scale that up. I'll zoom in, and I'll press R to rotate that. I want to make sure that this tracking marker is right between the 2 dots and that there's plenty of room around it. And hopefully now, if I change my tracking settings to not just motion, but also location and rotation, not just location. And over here in the tool shelf, you can press this little plus or press T. I'm going to change the motion model of the tracking system to not just location, but location and rotation as well. Okay, let's go ahead and do some tracking from frame 0. I'll go ahead under tracking in the tool shelf there, and I'll just press next a few times. In fact, I might prefetch that video so it all loads in, and I'll track a few times. Again, I'm being lazy here and I'm not making a sequence of images. I'm just using the original video file, so I'm living dangerously here. Let's go ahead and do some tracking. So I'll press track forward. And it tracked to frame 250, but that's not as long as I want my footage to be. In fact, I'll change my end value to 700. If I scrub through, you can see that the candle goes back down, and then there's a little bit of time after the candle's back down again. So that's about as long as I want this video to be. So I've tracked only to frame 250 or so. It's right there. In the next frame, this goes that color, which means that it's not tracking in that next 251 frame. So let's go ahead and track more. And I'm watching this area, and it does a little bit jiggle around. So what I might want to do is go back to where it starts to jiggle around. Right there. I don't like kind of how it slides. So I'm going to clear everything after that point. And I'm going to reposition the tracking marker. I'm going to make a new keyframe right there. In fact, I might rotate it just a little bit. There we go. So I made a keyframe at frame 528. I'm going to track forward now, and that looks quite good to me, I think. So I've got a tracker tracking the location and rotation of the candle. Let's go ahead and make a mask. I'll go back to frame 0. To make a mask, you cannot be in tracking mode. You need to go into mask mode of the movie clip editor window. And first I'll press A to deselect that tracker and go into mask mode. I'm going to click on new mask, and I'll change my mask to candle.mask. And we're going to make 2 masks in here actually, all in the same mask. We're going to make a mask for the reflection on the table, as well as this little candle holder, because it jiggles when I put the candle down and when I raise the candle up. And we're going to make an animated mask, a section that will be parented to this tracker that will follow the candle up. So to make a mask, you hold Control down on your keyboard and you left click. I'm going to actually left click and drag though, because I want to make a rounded mask, and that's what little handles do. So you click and drag in the direction that you want to go, and when you're pulling out that little handle, it makes it rounded, as you can see right there. So do one right there and pull it out, right there and pull it out. This takes some practice, so don't worry if you can't figure it out the first few times you try it. You could just left click with control down and then make them rounded afterwards. Left click and drag, left click and drag. I want to make the mask go out here, so I'm just going to put one point at the top, so I'll left click and drag in the direction I want to go, and then I'll press Alt-C, and Alt-C will make this mask cyclic. Otherwise you can go to mask, toggle cyclic. That'll close off that last gap. Now I want to make a feather here, so I'll hold Shift and drag out one of these points by left clicking and dragging, and that will make a feather. Actually, what I need to do here is I want to add a point right where this stick goes behind the candle, because we'll want to make sure that none of the stick is showing. So I'll hold control down on my keyboard and just left click there. I'm going to make sure that this mask doesn't go past the edge of the candle, especially right here, because we don't want that to show through, which means that this edge might get cropped a little bit more. Of course, now we might want to actually make some of this mask a little bit more feathered by dragging out the green line. That's the feathering point, just to give ourselves some leeway and not make it look like the candle is too cut off or trimmed at all. I'm going to make this feather quite a lot because I want to make sure that it doesn't look fake at all, especially when it's going around or up past the white wall behind the candle when it floats up there. Great, it's looking pretty good to me. Let's go and see how this looks. So now I'm going to use this mask using nodes. I'm gonna plug the mask into this factor of the alpha over to cut a hole around the candle so we can see the candle floating above me. So let's go ahead and press Shift A on our keyboards, and I'll go to Input Mask. I'm going to select my candle mask right there, and I'll plug the mask factor, which is just a black and white image, or movie actually, because we'll be doing animation. And I'm going to plug that just by left clicking and dragging into the factor of the alpha over. Now it's not showing it. Why is that? Let's go ahead and try switching around that. So with this footage on the plugged into the bottom, it'll actually go behind, so I want that to be on top. Actually, the reason why it's not showing the candle right now is because we have not changed in the properties window the resolution to match the resolution of our two video files. Again, this video was shot, or both videos were shot on a Canon T3i camera at 1080p at about 24 frames per second, but this is set to 50%, so I'll scale that up, and hopefully you will now see, if I go back to frame 0, the candle. But that mask is not yet animated, so when the candle goes up, that mask just shows the couch from the candle video. And as you can see, it's off. The candle got shifted a bit between the time that I shot this and this, so we'll fix that in a few minutes. Let's go ahead and make this animated mask actually animated. So at frame 0, what I want to do is I want to select my entire mask. I'll press A a few times. I want to hold Shift on my keyboard and right click on that tracking marker. So the mask was selected, I held Shift, I right click on the tracking marker to select it, and I'll press Control P on my keyboard. And when I press Control P, it just shows me now this active point section. It kind of expanded out to show me that I don't actually know what any of this means, but now I know that the mask is parented to that tracking marker. And so now if I scrub through, you'll see the mask is actually moving around as the tracking marker is moving around, and the mask goes up. Now, the rotation of my tracking marker unfortunately does not affect the rotation of the mask, and I'm really not sure why that is the case. So we will have to animate the mask rotating throughout the video, but that's not too long of a job. I wish I did know how to make it so that the mask rotated with the rotation of the tracker, especially because it is rotating. I'm just not sure how to do that at that point. If you do know how, please comment below this video on YouTube. It would be a great help, and I'll make a video on that to show everyone. Okay, so we have this animated mask working. It's pretty accurate until the candle starts to rotate. Let's go ahead and animate that mask. So what I want to do here is actually make a new window. I have a timeline, but in order to see the keyframes of a mask, I'm going to make this window taller. I'm going to divide this window up, so I'll grab this little cross-hatched area, drag it straight down. I'll leave this bottom window as a timeline, but I'm going to change this next window into a dope sheet. And you actually cannot see keyframes for a mask in the default dope sheet window. So I'll change this dope sheet option over to mask. This is the mode of this dope sheet window. So now I'll be able to see the keyframes of the mask when I make keyframes on the mask. Let's go ahead and press A on our keyboard to select the entire or all the points of the mask, and I'm going to set a keyframe by pressing I on my keyboard. I is insert keyframe, and when I was in that area I pressed I, and so now there's a keyframe at frame 0 of that mask. It looks good right until about frame 112. So right at 112 I'm going to press I again with my mouse in this window, and so it made a keyframe, and so now from frame 0 to frame 112 it's correct. I'm going to go to frame 121 about, and what I'll do now, instead of pressing I every time, is I'm just going to turn on auto keyframing right there with that little red dot. When it's dark and you make any changes, it'll actually record and make keyframes whenever you have that record button on and you make changes. So let's go ahead and press A few times. Oh, look at this. I'm trying to rotate the mask, and it's just rotating the individual points. Again, this took me a little bit to solve, but over here you can orbit to pan around the header of this window. If it's too narrow, you can press your middle mouse wheel down like a button and kind of just drag it around. I'm going to change the rotation point or the pivot point to median point. By default it's at individual origins, so median point. And so now if I have all of the points selected and I press R, it'll rotate the entire mask. So right about there. Looks pretty good to me. I'm going to actually go through after if I need to and adjust that point on each one of my keyframes to make sure it's not showing any of the stick that's holding up the candle. Okay, let's go ahead and revisit a few of the frames in between. Right there, it looks like it's a little bit off, so I'll press R. Okay, let's go a little bit later, and I'll press R. So as you can see, this is about as tedious as it gets. You're just going to have to correct it kind of every few frames and then scrub through to see how it's doing. I'll press R there. Looks pretty good to me. And because it's feathered, it'll be a little bit forgiving. R right there. Okay, so we have the mask for our candle, and any little jiggling that happens now will get kind of caught in that feather, so it still will show it. I need to add the mask of the reflection, and that's just going to be a static mask. And so I'll go back to frame 0 or frame 1. I'll just kind of move this around by scrolling and orbiting. I'll go back to frame 0, I'll turn off animation, and with this same candle mask, I won't bother making a second mask. I'll hold Control down. In fact, I'm going to deselect, I'll press A to deselect that entire mask. Now I'll hold Control down on my keyboard, and I'm just going to make a mask that encompasses, by left clicking and holding down Control, the entire part of the table that has that candle holder on it, and Alt-C to close it. I will hold Shift on my keyboard and drag on one of the points. That mask is the wrong way around. So to select just this mask and invert it, I'll press L. I'll put my mouse over part of this mask or one of the points, and I'll press L. That will select the linked part of that mask, in other words, this line. I'll go to Mask and switch direction. So now the feather is on the outside, and I'll just kind of make it right about there, and I'll make this part very, very feathered. The reflection of the stick is not really visible very much. If you want to be really picky, you could actually animate around this reflection, but I'm not going to. I can't be bothered, and it's hard to see anyways. Okay, let's go ahead. Actually, I'll press Control, and I'll add a new point by left-clicking and holding Control, and I'll make this part very feathered as well, just because we want to blend very nicely. And there we go. So now, oh no, the mask needs to be corrected at all the keyframes. Okay, so to fix this problem, and what you can see is happening is because I made this mask after I had animated another part of the same mask, it's not letting me adjust. If I hold Shift and drag to feather out this mask, if I try to scrub through, the feathering kind of goes back to its default state. I'm not sure why it's not doing it for those ones as well. If I have record turned on and I do it, is that going to fix it? Let's see if I can scrub through now. No, it needs to be done at every single one of these keyframes. I'm not going to do that. Let's go ahead and make another mask, which means our nodes will have to get a little bit more complicated, but so be it. With my mouse over one of these points in the static mask, I'll press L on my keyboard to select all of that, and I'll press X on my keyboard to get rid of that part of the mask. So now we have a functioning part of our mask that just is the candle part. Great. I'll make a new mask. So I'll click on this little X. That will not actually get rid of it in the file. It'll just get rid of it in this window. Because this little F, which stands for fake user, is dark, if I click this X, that mask will still think it's being used by a fake user, so it won't actually get rid of it in the file. I'll click on New, and I'll make a new mask. Again, I'm going to hold Control and left click around the table where I want an Alt-C to close that gap, where I want the reflection to stay. And with that mask selected, I'll go to Mask and switch direction, and I'll hold Control, and I'll get rid of, I'll turn off animation, which I had on by accident, and I'll make this bigger. Great, I'll hold Control there. Whoops, Control, there we go. To make this more feathered. Great. Okay, so because I had this ribbon record button turned on when I made this mask and when I made the feathers of this static mask, and then I scrubbed through my timeline, they snapped back to their original position. So what I just did was I turned on record again after I turned it off, which would not let me place them, the feather line where I want it to be. I turned this back on, and now I've basically made a keyframe. It's not actually showing up. Ah, there it is. I made one keyframe of this mask, which is just called mask, of the feathering in the right spots. With record turned on, I'll actually adjust it. And so now on frame 0, it has one keyframe of that mask in that position. So now if I scrub through, it stays like that the entire time, which is what I want. Let's go ahead and name this mask reflection or table dot mask. And so now we'll be able to identify those when we add the nodes. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to make this window a little bit narrower. I'll grab the edge of that window and kind of scooch it over there. Now, we have our video clips, we have our alpha over, we have our candle mask. What I need to do here is take this section, in other words, the candle footage and the candle mask and the alpha over, and I had to repeat this process and layer another video with another mask, in this case the reflection video with the reflection mask, or table reflection with table mask, over top of this output. So I'm going to drag these three nodes over, including the little reroute node, and I'm going to duplicate this alpha over, so Shift D with it selected, I'll drag it into this noodle. I'm going to duplicate these two nodes, Shift D, and I'll plug it into there. And the factor, I don't want to keep the candle section again with the candle mask. I'm going to change that to table mask, and let's just hold Alt and orbit over to see if we can see the right thing. I'll just kind of scrub around, and as you can see now, I can see that reflection now. If I didn't have any of that section, if I didn't add this or this or this, you wouldn't see the reflection there. So let's go ahead and scrub through. In fact, I'll just readjust these to make it a little bit neater. Maybe I'll grab these and move them over. G to grab that one, and I'll move this one over. And I'll make this one narrow again. So I hope you can understand what's going on with this. We're combining the original two here, and then we're adding over top using another alpha over the reflection and the table mask. So now if I scrub through, it should look pretty good. There's a few things we need to do. At this point we want to get rid of these tracking markers on my candle. If I press Alt-V and then Alt and orbit around, you can see I have these 2 points I want to get rid of, and I want to fix the layering issue where the camera is jiggled. To fix that, let's go ahead and I'm actually going to mute these 3 nodes just to make it a little bit simpler for us. I'll mute that one, and mute that one. So now we can just see the original result. If I put the candle over top of the edge of that cushion, you can see that if I kind of orbit around, that the cushion is not in the same spot, so we're not getting a good result here. And that's because the background video is off. So the way I can actually solve this is if I hold Control down and I left click and drag, you can see I'm getting a knife right now with Control and left clicking and dragging. I'm gonna cut through that noodle to get rid of it. And as you can see, the video shifted. If I change this factor from 1 to 0 to show the other video, it shifts. So you can see the 2 different videos are, well, that's pre-multiply. I want to change the factor, are a little bit off. If I put it at halfway or at 0.5, you can see how much they're off by. And I'm going to actually hold Alt and pan over so you can see it kind of on a static object there. So I'm actually going to move the original or background image with me doing the force. So I'm going to press Shift A, and I'm going to add in a distort and transform node. So under distort, transform, I'm going to transform by just moving this background image over and up depending on where it needs to go. So I'll drag that node into this noodle. And I want to try to make these 2 things match up as precisely as I can just by dragging around the X and Y value to the best of my ability to make them be lined up. You also have access to rotation and scale in case you move your camera forward or backwards a little bit, and hopefully you can make them match pretty perfectly. So now to test it, I'm going to drag factor down to 0 and drag factor up to 1, and it looks pretty good to me. I think there's a little bit of rotation there, but I'm not going to be that picky with it. Let's go ahead and plug the mask back in, and if I zoom out, Alt-V, or V rather, and then Alt and move it over, because we moved this background footage, it actually kind of stretched the image in the video. So now if I look very carefully, there's actually some kind of repeated section over here. If I zoom in, is it at the top or bottom? It's at the bottom and this side, I think. What I want to do is crop the result of my video now. It doesn't make it black because we moved this video, let's say, way over. It actually will not show us where it's cropped. I'll undo that though, but there will be black in the resulting video or sort of a stretching effect on the side. So right before we export to a video, I need to grab that little splitter node. I want to actually scale up the video a little bit, so I'll press Shift A, I'll go to distort and scale, and I'm going to put it in there, and I'll scale this up just to 0 or 1.05. Or even less than that, 1.05, just to make the video a little bit bigger, so it'll be cropped a little bit. Great. Let's go ahead and show all the layers again. With this node selected, I'll press M to unmute it, and M, and so now we have a pretty darn good result. I could go through and I could fix the masking around the candle. The very last step is to take that candle and get rid of the markers, the little felt pen dots that I put on it, And the way I'll do that, and I'll do it automatically, is I'm just going to create a mask and I'm going to blur the candle video, and I'm going to cut holes in this video. So where these little dots are will be holes, and it'll show through a blurred version, which will kind of blur away these points. So I have two masks already. I have candle mask and tail mask. I'm going to click on X to get rid of those, at least in this window, and I'll click on New to make a new mask. I'm going to add a circle, and instead of just drawing a mask, so I'm going to left click actually right on one of the markers, which puts this little cursor there, and I'm going to add a circle. I'm going to scale that way down so it's just a little bit bigger than that dot. And if I hold Shift and left click and drag, I can give it a feather just like normal. I'm going to give it a pretty good size feather. I'm going to press A couple times to select it all, Shift D to duplicate it, put it down here. We'll do two circles in the same mask. I'm going to select them both now, and I'm going to right click by withholding Shift on this tracking marker. I'm going to parent, by doing that, these two circles, these masks, to this tracker. So with those two selected and the tracker selected, I'll press Control P to parent them. And so now if I drag the playhead around, you can see the circles stick to that tracking marker. You will need to rotate it if you're being really picky, because the candle rotates, in my case at least, but I'm not going to be that picky. The feather should pick everything up there on the two circles. Let's go ahead and make that work. So let's take a look at the original footage. There's my candle footage, and it gets plugged into this alpha over to be layered with or composited with the footage of me, and then it gets its own mask. Before any of that happens though, I'm now going to take this footage and do its own alpha over and blur the bottom version with a mask in order to cut holes and blur the bottom version so you can't see the markers anymore. So I'm going to take this node and duplicate it, Shift D. I'll move the copy down there. I'm going to press Shift A. I'll add a color alpha over, and we want to plug both of these versions into it. I'm going to use this mask, which I will call markers.mask. And I'll press Shift A. I'll add an input mask node. I'll put it right up there. And I'm going to select markers.mask and plug it into there. And so now it doesn't look any different because we have two of the same videos overlapping each other, and there's a mask cutting a hole in one of them to show through to this one, but I'm going to blur this one. So I'll press Shift A, I'll add a filter, a blur, I'll put it in this noodle to blur this version. I'm going to use fast Gaussian blur as opposed to just Gaussian blur because it's faster, and I'll type in 20, and you'll see, even though we haven't done the Y value yet, if I type in, I don't want relative, I want absolute, you'll see it gets blurred out. If I type that back to 0, you'll see they show up again. So I'll type in 20 and 20, and you can play around with your own values, maybe 10 and 10. That looks a bit better to me actually. You cannot see the markers anymore. And so now I think we have a pretty darn good result. What I'll do now is I think we're finished. I'm going to render this out now, and then I'll put these nodes back up on the screen in full screen so you can see it. Let's go ahead and do a save. Control S. I'm going to save this to my desktop. I'm going to call it Candle the Force, and I'll click on Save Blender File. Let's go ahead and change our output type from PNG to H.264, and the encoding from AVI to MPEG-4 as always. And let's go ahead and change our output location just to the desktop, and I'm going to call this one wire removal result. And I'll click on accept. And let's go ahead and render this out. This will take quite some time because it is processing a lot of different videos. It's applying filters, it's using masks, so expect to wait around for several minutes, but I'll speed this part of the video up. I'll click on animation. Alright, so let's finish processing. That actually took about 20 minutes to do. Let's go ahead and do a Control S to save. I'll press Escape on my keyboard to go back to the nodes, but I'll put those back up on the screen in full screen once we've checked out the result. I'll close the other two old videos, and there's my result video. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. And let's see how it looks once the candle starts going up. Looks really, really good to me. I noticed when I was practicing for this video that there are a few little flaws here. The exposure or the light in the room actually did change a little bit. So if you look really closely around where the mask is, it looks lighter around the flame. It looks lighter in the room when I went back, actually when I filmed the candle part. So I could adjust one of the footage to be lighter or darker, but we'll just leave it the way it is. Let's go ahead and close this, and as promised, I'll put the nodes back on the screen in full screen. There they are. That will be it with this video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to see more tutorials like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.